One of my favourite things about the endurance and evolution of Batman as a character is that there's sort of been a Batman for every generation. If, like me, you were an impressionable 12-year-old when The Dark Knight came out, chances are Nolan's trilogy has informed a lot of your perception of the Batman mythos. Conversely, if you ask our parents, they'd probably point to the 1960s and Adam West's TV show as the standard by which they measure the character. However, there are a handful of interpretations that are held up by most fans as particularly definitive. Comics like The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke regularly crop up in discussion, as do Rocksteady's Arkham video games. But there's one in particular that I would argue pretty much all fans agree on, as it not only emerged at the perfect time, not only covered an eclectic range of tones and stories without feeling jarring, and not only brought together a multi-talented creative team who is still putting out content to this day, it recontextualized the character and mythos in a way that informed how most Batman stories have been written since. I'm of course talking about Batman, the animated series.
Yeah, if you've been following my videos, first of all, thank you, you're awesome, I do appreciate you supporting tiny channels like mine. And secondly, you've probably heard me talk about Batman the Animated Series before. By the way, for brevity's sake, I'm going to refer to it as BTAS for the rest of the video. Like a lot of Batman fans, this is the interpretation of the character that I consider pretty definitive. Don't get me wrong, I love a lot of different versions of the character, and I would be one sad Ross if I couldn't play the Arkham games or read The Long Halloween or The Black Mirror again. But if I had to pick just one version to revisit any time I wanted, though that surprisingly doesn't stem from the show being my first exposure to the character. Being born in '96, I'm a little bit younger than your average BTAS fan.
And it was actually a combination of The Batman, the early 2000s TV show, and the first Tim Burton film that first got me into Batman at the tender age of 8.
BTAS I actually discovered a little bit later.
Through the magic of YouTube, 11-year-old Ross found this older show that wasn't on TV anymore, but a lot of Batman fans seem to love.
And it didn't take me long to realise why.
From the dark aesthetic evocative of the Burton films, to the bold dynamic voice acting, to the simple but brilliant character designs.
I've only grown to love the show more over time, especially as I've become more aware of its lasting impact. Yeah, it's not hyperbole to say that Batman and why the DC media would not exist as it does today, if not for this series. And arguably neither would a lot of other superhero media.
The concept of a shared superhero universe, for example, has only really been embraced by the mainstream since the creation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for Kevin Feige and the leaps and bounds he made with the MCU, which is arguably the key factor in recent memory that's made superheroes the cultural juggernaut they are now.
However, I am going to be a petty bitch and say DC did it first.
The success of BTAS launched the likes of Batman Beyond, Superman the Animated Series, and Justice League Unlimited, all combining to create the DC Animated Universe, or DCAU.
While I'm sure the timeline where the DCAU never came to fruition would still have a lot of quality superhero media, it would be much more of a niche market than we've grown used to. And with no frame of reference for how to approach a shared universe in a medium outside of comics, the MCU probably wouldn't exist. With that said, I'm not going to pretend that BTAS didn't have its own set of influences.
Coming out in the wake of the two Tim Burton films, it would be fair to say that it was heavily inspired by them. The massive success of Batman '89 combined with the critical acclaim lavished on comics like Year One, The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke, ensuring that the late 80s pushed the demand for a darker, more operatic Batman to the mainstream forefront. On top of that, the gothic Art Deco trappings of Burton's films established a style that seemed tonally fitting for the character and would lend itself well to animation.
Bruce Timm would eventually coin the term Dark Deco to describe the show's unique style, drawing not only from the influential Batman media of the late 80s,
but also from Max Fleischer's 40s Superman shorts, as well as classic film noir and German expressionist cinema. They created a world that, while using modern and in some cases futuristic technology, essentially felt like a time capsule of the 1940s. Which makes sense, since that was the decade Batman comics came into their own in popular culture.
Eric Radomski also made the ingenious decision to draw all the backgrounds on black paper.
This was initially a practical choice to make drawing a city at nighttime easier, but it became one of the key creative decisions that would define the show's style for years to come.
In short, BTAS was simultaneously a complete love letter to the roots of Batman and the media that influenced his creation, and a natural evolution that redefined the character. What's interesting about the show in a wider animation context is that many of the creative team didn't come from a background of superhero media or even comic book fans generally.
Voice casting director Andrea Romano came from a more comedic background, having worked on DuckTales and Tiny Toons. Bruce Timm's main claim to fame pre-BTAS was being a storyboard artist on Tiny Toons, and the voice of the Dark Knight himself, Kevin Conroy, was a theatre actor with very little frame of reference for superheroes or voice work.
This is by no means a bad thing, though, since a team this diverse meant that despite the show's clear influences, there was a certain freshness in the way it was approached creatively. I was actually fortunate enough to meet Kevin Conroy and Andrea Romano
following a live stream at GalaxyCon where they discussed the show along with fellow actors Lauren Lester, Robin, John Glover, the Riddler, and Diane Pershing, Poison Ivy.
When I spoke to Andrea Romano, she recalled that the show presented an interesting career challenge for her that was made easier and more fun by the rest of the team working on it.
I was curious, were you a fan of Batman and superhero stuff before you tackled BTAS, or was it sort of just another gig at the time?
You know, the only Batman that I knew was the Adam West Batman.
Sure, of course.
I didn't read the comics then. Most women didn't read comics then, or young girls even, you know? If they did, it was like the romance comics or the Archie and, you know, all those silly comics. They weren't the action comics for girls. And so Adam West, that series, as you know, was very comic. And then when Bruce Timm came to me and said, we want to make a really different Batman. We want to make The Dark Knight. We want to do a different... I thought, that's an excellent challenge. Most of the shows I had done up to that point were more comedy-driven and musicals.
Animaniacs.
DuckTales before that, and Animaniacs, all stuff that was very kind of lighthearted. I thought, no, this is a good challenge. And if you watch the first few episodes of Batman the Animated Series, you'll see that they're... in style, I'm still trying to find my feet as far as what the style of that was. And then when we got 5 or 6 episodes in, it's like, okay, now I get what we're doing. And by that point, I could see some footage of the animation, so I knew how dark it was and what we were trying to do.
All drawn on black paper, no less.
That's right, exactly right. And so I was like, okay, now I get it. We're not making Smurfs. You know, we're making a totally different show. And and what was really cool was the actors that were doing the best work were actors that had done stage work. Stage actors like Kevin Conroy, people who had done, they understood that.
Broadway and Shakespeare.
That's right. So they all understood the energy, and that was really cool. That made it easy for me.
Her observation on the actors understanding the energy was particularly noteworthy. As with many of them coming from theatre, they'd no doubt worked with their fair share of Shakespearean tragedies, and knew that this approach was key to Batman's world.
These characters are moulded by tragedy, and understanding that is one of the key things in making a great Batman adaptation. The writers knew this too, especially Paul Dini, who wrote the iconic episode Heart of Ice, and transformed Mr. Freeze from a mostly forgotten one-shot villain to one of the most deeply tragic and damaged characters in Batman's rogues gallery. Freeze's new backstory was so effective that it's been incorporated into almost every version of him since, even objectively not good ones like Batman and Robin.
Though I personally can have a lot of ironic fun with that movie.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
Dini deserves all the credit in the world, not just for creating new backstories, but also entirely new characters.
Along with Bruce Timm and Mitch Bryan, he created GCPD cop Renee Montoya, who's since featured in multiple comic books and other media, and even made her live-action film debut in Birds of Prey.
And, of course, it would be horribly amiss of me not to mention Harley Quinn.
Originally created as a one-shot henchwoman for the episode Joker's Favour, Harley exploded in popularity, and is now considered by many to be the 4th founding pillar of DC, alongside Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman.
So, naturally, since these innovative creations were all for BTAS, we really can't overestimate the show's impact. It's informed so much of our current superhero media and animation. On top of redefining the Batman mythos and laying the groundwork for shared superhero universes,
you could argue that shows like Avatar The Last Airbender and Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated owe a lot to BTAS for their approach to adult themes and serialized storytelling, all under the guise of so-called children's cartoons.
And this is where things get frustrating for me. I have run into roadblocks many a time trying to get people into BTAS, purely because they see that it's a cartoon and immediately dismiss it as something they can't take seriously. Ultimately arguing that because it's animated, it must be for children, which... Something I wish more people would understand is that animation is not a genre, it's a medium, and it can appeal to a wide range of audiences. Look at it in relation to other mediums. In theatre, you wouldn't put Wicked in the same category as Equus. In live-action film, you wouldn't put Paddington 2 in the same category as Uncut Gems. And in animation, you wouldn't put Snow White in the same category as Waltz with Bashir. Animation is just another form of storytelling with its own creative language.
A lot of animation can appeal to everyone by using a visual language that appeals to children, whilst portraying stories and characters that appeal to adults.
BTAS is a textbook example of this, which is something Kevin Conroy confirmed when I spoke to him.
It was
Everything.
never written to be a kid's show. It was never aimed towards
Sure,
kids.
yeah.
It was really an adult show. And originally,
Oh, yeah.
originally it was on prime time on Fox. So it is very adult. The stories are adult.
Oh, for sure.
The artwork was all hand painted.
On black paper, no less, which was like crazy at the time.
And the symphony was a full symphony score. I mean, everything they did about it was expensive. They just threw money at it. And it's why it looks so good after so many years.
And that's why it holds up now, I suppose, which is... Yeah.
But your experience of coming to it later is not unusual.
No.
Just a few minutes ago, I was talking to a woman who just discovered it a few years ago. So
well, there you go.
it appeals to adults.
So, you heard it from Batman himself. It was never conceived as a show for children and children alone. It was always designed to appeal to adults too. Which rings true because I think a lot of the best animation out there takes a similar approach.
If you look at early Simpsons, the Studio Ghibli films, or filmmakers like Brad Bird, they all have a similar feel of being written primarily for adults, but in a way that children can still understand and enjoy.
And, in a way, that's the perfect approach to take when adapting Batman, because a character so universal and beloved should appeal to everyone.
Children can enjoy the superhero action and outlandish villains, while adults enjoy the dark stories, smart dialogue, and fleshed out characters. In a sense, BTAS provided something for every kind of Batman fan. For fans of the Tim Burton films, it had the Dark Deco style and grand operatic scale. If you were sucked into the gritty psychological stories of those late 80s comics, there was plenty of that. And if you were an old school fan who came to Batman through Adam West, then you could enjoy the witty, often hilarious writing, and the campy, colourful villains.
With that range of styles combined in a way that never felt jarring or derivative, it's no wonder the show has such a strong, iconic staying power. Its impact has clearly been felt by the show's own creative team too.
Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill have continued to voice Batman and Joker respectively, notably in the Arkham games, which by no coincidence share a lot of similarities with BTAS.
Paul Dini wrote for them too, and they're fucking awesome. The fact that I met Kevin Conroy and Andrea Romano at GalaxyCon shows that they're still a close team who love meeting fans and seeing the show's legacy firsthand. Conroy even had this to say about meeting fans.
The amazing thing is meeting people at Comic-Cons and hearing the effect that the character had on people growing up.
Yeah.
The safety they felt with Batman, the protection that they felt with people who had difficult childhoods. It makes you as an actor so proud to have been a part of it. You know what I mean?
To have that kind of influence and staying power. Yeah. And really, isn't that what superheroes are all about?
They're escapist entertainment, but they still have relatable qualities that provide comfort and familiarity when we need it. At his best, Batman is defined by his ability to rise above personal tragedy and channel it into something positive and honourable. He's not perfect, sometimes he goes too far, but those flaws are what make him human.
It's not easy to make a billionaire relatable, but damned if BTAS doesn't handle Bruce Wayne and all his allies and enemies as perfectly as we could hope for.
And the fact that these characters were put in the hands of writers, actors and animators who knew how to make them timeless and universal across multiple generations is just the icing on the cake.
I could talk about this series for hours, but honestly I think I've said my piece already. Batman the Animated Series is beloved for a reason.
It's endlessly influential, it redefined the Batman mythos and opened up a realm of new possibilities. Its impact is still felt today.
Honestly, I think the best way to wrap up is by reeling off my top 15 favourite episodes, which are some of my favourite Batman stories in any medium. No spoilers in case you've still yet to see any of them. Let's go.
Number 15. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Riddler is a villain that can be tricky to do well, but David Wise's writing and John Glover's performance are about as character-defining as it gets. This episode strikes a delicate balance between giving him an understandable motivation without taking away from what a narcissistic asshole he is. Add the fun Greek mythology trappings into the mix and you've got a classic episode I've revisited more times than I care to admit. Number 14, The Demon's Quest, Parts 1 and 2.
Yeah, I'm counting 2 episodes as one, shut up, it's all the same story.
Drawing a lot from pulpy old adventure serials, this is a pitch-perfect introduction to Ra's Talia al Ghul. It's globe-hopping, it's action-packed, it's romantic, it's scary when it wants to be. Sure, there's some dated racial coding and thin characterization, but all in all, this is a great adventure story with a grand scale, intimidating and fleshed-out villain, and bold, epic action. Great stuff. Number 13, Vendetta. Killer Croc is often unfairly sidelined as the big dumb one, but his introductory episode shows how cunning and conniving a villain he can be.
I also find Vendetta to be one of the best episodes for showing Batman's detective skills at work.
The mystery of his investigation carries through both the steady pacing and the noirish style. Spotlighting Harvey Bullock works too. As the most brutish and nasty of the GCPD, he's kind of a perfect parallel to Croc. A cracking and seriously underrated episode. Number 12, Never Fear. Another underrated one.
If you watched my video on Scarecrow, you'll have heard me talk about this episode in detail, so I'll keep things brief.
Suffice it to say, this is a rare, genuinely great Scarecrow story that cleverly subverts his usual gimmick whilst keeping the essence of the character intact, and also allows for some thoughtful examination of Batman's moral compass. Number 11, Baby Doll. Riding a fine line between goofy and devastating, Baby Doll is a fascinating new addition to the Rogues Gallery. In the tradition of Batman's villains working best as dark reflections of him, Baby Doll kind of lost her childhood whilst also being perpetually trapped in it. Serving as a great team-up episode too, where Robin has some more active agency in the plot, this is a unique story with a heartbreaking conclusion that I'm not afraid to say has got me choked up in the past. Number 10, Perchance to Dream. I'm always partial to a what-if story, and this is one of the best ones you're likely to find. Putting Bruce in a too-good-to-be-true dream world, the story kind of writes itself, since we know our hero is not one who will ever accept his own happiness. The episode drips atmosphere too. The Bell Tower fight is a particular highlight, and although a tragic conclusion is inevitable, you'll be glued to the screen the entire time. Number 9. I Am the Night. This episode is tied with Perchance to Dream for my favourite vocal performance from Conroy's Batman. Arguably the most anguished and world-weary he's been through the whole series, this episode takes a look at the burden Bruce's mission puts on his own self-worth, whilst also examining the importance of his surrogate family, particularly Jim Gordon. The dynamic between Batman and Gordon is one of my favourite parts of the mythos, and it's no better realised than here. Number 8. Mad Love. The episode that gave Harley Quinn her backstory, this is a classic for good reason. Mad Love pulls no punches in its portrayal of an abusive relationship, making the Joker's cruelty all too clear and laying the groundwork for Harley to become one of DC's most beloved and tragic characters. Number 7, Beware the Grey Ghost. This episode is beloved for good reason by both fans and the show's own creative team.
I loved The Grey Ghost.
Though the novelty of having the original TV Batman, the late great Adam West, as the guest star shouldn't be the only thing we remember it for. On top of being a heartfelt passing of the torch, it's a compelling character-driven mystery in its own right, which honours a lot of Batman's influences and makes him perhaps the most relatable he's ever been, by giving him his own childhood hero. Number 6, Two-Face, Parts 1 and 2. This is where the show's potential for psychological depth really started to show. Although he hadn't had loads of prior screen time with Harvey Dent, there was enough to establish him as a pretty decent dude and an old friend of Bruce's. So the revelation that he was battling some serious demons added a new level of tragedy to the writing, and led to about as iconic a version of Two-Face as you can get. Number 5, Almost Got Him. This episode makes Batman's rogues more human than ever by just having them hang out for a bit. As an added bonus, the flashbacks that break up the dialogue serve as a love letter to the over-the-top death traps from the Silver Age comics, making this episode equally enjoyable for both characters and action. Number 4, Over the Edge. As much as I love Perchance to Dream, this episode really has the
edge as far as what-if stories go.
Aside from being kind of shockingly violent, it's a compelling look at a worst-case scenario for the Bat family that dives into the anger and grief that would drive someone to take the law into their own hands. Arguably the darkest story in BTAS canon, pre-Return of the Joker anyway, Over the Edge nonetheless still finds time for some heartfelt character beats and genuine emotional stakes, ultimately reinforcing the importance of those core relationships we know and love. Number 3, Heart of Ice. This is considered by many to be the best episode of the whole series, due in no small part to the fact that it's the episode that won the show an Emmy.
And yeah, it's very easy to see why.
Taking a D-list gimmick crook and turning him into a full-blown Shakespearean tragedy was such a bold move on Paul Dini's part that paid off so well. Michael Ansara's delivery of those monologues still gives me goosebumps to this day, selling Mr. Freeze as both a legitimate threat and a thoroughly broken man whose motivation is all too easy to sympathise with. Number 2, the man who killed Batman. This is sort of to BTAS what Blink is to Doctor Who, centred around an average main character whose life is changed by an encounter with the titular hero. This episode does a great job showing what an impact Batman has on those around him, particularly the Joker. The funeral scene and Joker's eulogy have kinda lived rent-free in my head for years, equal parts tense, darkly hilarious, and oddly moving, which honestly sums up the episode as a whole quite succinctly. And my number 1 favourite episode? Trial.
Oh man. This is as great as Batman stories get.
It features multiple villains and uses them brilliantly. It introduces a new character who brings a compelling new conflict to the table, and it tackles an oft-debated moral topic up front and centre, debating the idea that Batman may play a part in perpetuating Gotham's cycles of crime and destruction.
Trial is straight up one of the best written pieces of television I've ever seen.
Its moral questions are compelling, the humour still makes me laugh on multiple rewatches.
I'd like that last statement stricken from the record, please.
Record? Is someone supposed to be writing this down?
And it has such a thorough understanding of its characters that they all seem well-rounded even if they're only on screen for a minute or two. To say nothing of the stunning animation, perfect voice acting, and an ending that's about as character-defining a Batman moment as we could hope for.
If you only watch one episode of BTAS, make it this one.
That's all, folks.
Hi guys, so if you made it this far, first of all, thank you very much for staying with me in my ramblings for so long. In case you hadn't guessed, this video was originally supposed to come out quite a bit sooner. Nonetheless, I did think it was about time I did a proper sort of look over Batman the Animated Series, especially in light of meeting Conroy and Andrea Romano at GalaxyCon, which was super cool. Like, you know, Conroy's as cool as you'd expect, Andrea Romano is just genuinely lovely. I can't guarantee a very regular upload schedule this year because, you know, work has just been getting more hectic, but I do have some cool video ideas planned, so I hope you'll stay with me for a few of those. In the meantime, as ever, feel free to follow me on my various platforms, and yeah, whenever I finish my next video, I'll see you guys then. Take care.